The maester's voice echoes in the dimly lit hall, his aged fingers tracing the dust of forgotten history on the stone table. The flickering of candlelight dances on the walls, casting shadows of a world that never was, one where a crucial moment, a great betrayal, was avoided. Ah, you wish to hear of a time when the blood of the Starks did not soak the floor of the Frey Hall? When the halls of Riverrun remained unharmed by the cruel hands of fate? I can tell you this tale, though it is a darker thing to ponder. What if the Red Wedding never happened? Let us begin, then, at the eve of the wedding, as Robb Stark, the king in the north, gathered his forces for what he believed would be a strategic alliance to solidify his cause. A marriage pact meant to unite the North and the Riverlands with the once proud House of Frey, long aligned with the Lannisters, the very enemies Robb had sworn to destroy. On that fateful day, Robb Stark, with his young wife and his mother Catelyn, traveled to the hall of Lord Walder Frey, a lord of old blood and bitter ambition, with a grudge against the Starks so deep it would not be sated by anything less than betrayal. The day was set, and what followed would become a story whispered across Westeros for generations. How a king was slain in the halls of his supposed ally, his mother murdered, his family shattered, and his army left leaderless. But what if this bloody tale, this great tragedy, had never come to pass? What if Robb Stark had seen through Frey's deceit? Or if Catelyn Stark had acted with foresight and wisdom beyond her grief-fueled rage? The maester's eyes narrow as he leans forward, the weight of the question settling into the silence. That is the question, my friends. What if the Red Wedding never happened? What if the blood of the Starks was never spilled in that hall? What would become of the North? What of the Seven Kingdoms? Would the balance of power have shifted? Would King's Landing still have felt the iron grip of the Lannisters? Would the Targaryens have returned sooner or at all? The maester falls into a reflective pause, then exhales, as if burdened by the weight of possibility. Let us begin with the Stark family. Young Robb, not betrayed, would he still have been the same noble, impulsive leader? Would he have united the North? Or would the region have fractured further under his rule? And what of his allies? The bold, hard-headed House of Tully, and the defiant northern houses who had sworn loyalty to him. Without the betrayal that broke them apart, could the war be won? Or was it always too late for the North, as the Lannisters' hold on the throne grew ever tighter? He looks out the window, as if peering into the mists of an alternate history. The wind stirs, and the candles flicker again. The course of history in Westeros was shaped by one cruel event. The Stark family, once at the center of it, was scattered, shattered, lost. And yet, the world remains malleable. It may bend, twist, break, and reform. So now let us see. What would have become of these lands had the Red Wedding never happened? The maester stands, his robes sweeping the floor, and moves to the map on the wall, his finger tracing the paths of war. It is time to explore the path not taken, to see how the threads of fate could have woven a very different tapestry, to ponder what would have happened in a world where Robb Stark's banner still flew, where the North stood strong, and where the Starks had not met their doom in the blood-streaked halls of House Frey. The maester's voice grows softer, almost mournful, as if acknowledging the frailty of the question. For, better or worse, the Red Wedding is a stain upon history. But in this tale, we shall turn back the hands of time, just for a moment, and gaze upon a world where it never came to pass. Divergence Point. The maester stands in the flickering light, a map spread out before him. His hand hovers over it, tracing invisible lines, as if the events of the past could be rewritten and the future redrawn. His voice takes on a tone of quiet reverence as he begins. Let us venture deeper into this altered timeline. We now reach the heart of the change, the moment where the blood-stained path that we know was shifted, bent, and perhaps even broken. The Red Wedding did not happen. But how did we arrive here? The maester's eyes grow distant as he begins recounting the critical turning point. It was a mere day before the wedding. Robb Stark, with his forces stationed outside the walls of Riverrun, prepared for his meeting with House Frey. The wedding, a union between Robb Stark and one of Lord Walder Frey's daughters, was meant to solidify his alliance with House Frey, one of the last major pieces of his fractured war effort. His mother, Catelyn Stark, had urged him to make peace with the Freys, but there was always a tension between them. It had been a difficult road to this point, with numerous alliances falling apart, promises broken, and most of all, the North divided. But in this world, it was not the same. A twist in the plot, a word spoken, a decision made differently. This time, Robb Stark listened not to his impulsiveness, nor to his desire for vengeance against the Freys for their previous insults, but instead to a different voice. Catelyn Stark's voice echoes in the maester's mind. She had been the one to beg Robb to rethink his strategy. In this world, she does not act in anger, but with cool deliberation. Let us say, in this telling, that Catelyn's heart did not burn with fury after the betrayal of her son's marriage to another woman. She did not allow grief to cloud her judgment. Instead, she saw what was at stake. Not just the marriage, but the future of the North. She spoke with Robb in private hours before the wedding feast, her words sharp and cutting, tempered by experience. "You must not trust the Freys, Robb," she would have said, her voice carrying the weight of her wisdom. "Their loyalties are fickle, and their ambitions outweigh their honor. Do not throw away everything we've fought for by placing your life in their hands." Now, in the original timeline, Robb, young and impetuous, could not see this. He would argue with his mother, and ultimately, against her counsel, he would proceed to the wedding, confident that his victory over the Lannisters had made him a king beyond reproach. His naivety sealed his fate, but in this world, Robb Stark, influenced by his mother's voice, listened. The maester's hand shifts on the map as he imagines this different outcome. In this moment, Robb Stark turns his back on the wedding. Instead of heading to the Frey Hall, he shifts his focus back to his soldiers. He sends a message to Lord Walder Frey, claiming that some pressing matter has delayed his arrival. It is a subtle lie, of course, but it's enough to create the delay that allows Robb's forces to reassess their position. The war is not lost yet. With his allies still in place, House Tully and the Northern Bannermen, the Starks hold a strong strategic advantage in the Riverlands. Robb cannot afford to risk the betrayal of the Freys. The maester's fingers trace the map again, his voice now heavy with the gravity of this change. Of course, this does not go unnoticed. House Frey, long known for its sharp ambition and its deep hatred of the Starks, would not be easily placated. The moment that Robb Stark cancels the wedding, Walder Frey feels the sting of rejection, and the winds of vengeance begin to blow. But unlike the original timeline, where Frey moves swiftly to retaliate with the Red Wedding, here he finds himself at a crossroads. His pride is wounded, but his calculations are sharp. He knows he cannot afford to act rashly, lest he alienate the other great houses of the realm. He takes a moment to bide his time, his hatred seething beneath a mask of feigned calm. That same night, Catelyn Stark's instincts, honed by years of watching the treacherous games of Westeros, lead her to see the dangers more clearly. Rather than allow her son to rush into what she knows would be a disastrous alliance, she sends an urgent message to House Tully and the remaining northern forces. Her letter is cryptic, but clear enough. The Freys cannot be trusted. The Starks must not fall into their trap. But even with this shift, the road is far from clear. Robb's decision to cancel the wedding and break ties with the House of Frey is a bold one. It fractures his alliances with other houses, particularly the powerful House Tully, whose forces had been promised to the Starks as part of the union with Frey. House Tully, already disillusioned with the Starks' unrelenting war, begins to waver. The very legitimacy of Robb's claim to the North becomes questioned in their eyes. His leadership falters, the tide of his war effort turning from a strong advance to a slow retreat. The Maester's eyes darken as he surveys the land of Westeros once more. In this new timeline, the fracture is not just political, it is also personal. Robb Stark, while never as naive as he was in the original world, is still young, and his authority is questioned by those who have fought beside him for so long. House Karstark, embittered by their treatment, begins to withdraw their support. The Baratheon loyalists, still undecided on which side to support, begin to see the North as a weaker player in the game for the throne. The Lannisters, ever opportunistic, begin to stir, sensing that the Starks' war is weakening, and the balance of power in the Seven Kingdoms might finally tilt in their favor. But even with these challenges, Robb's decision does not go unanswered by the larger world. The news of the canceled wedding travels quickly, and whispers reach King's Landing. Tywin Lannister, ever the strategist, sees an opportunity to exploit the confusion. He sends a quiet emissary to the Freys, offering them a position of power in the realm should they choose to turn their sword against the Starks. But Walder Frey, his pride stung, holds his ground, for now. The Maester pauses, a moment of reflection passing over his face. And so, the balance of power begins to shift. The North, united but fractured, faces an uncertain future. Without the Red Wedding, the Stark family is not destroyed, but the path to their victory is steepened. The death of the young wolf has been averted, but with it, a different kind of war begins. One fought not with blood and betrayal, but with careful diplomacy, shifting allegiances, and the ever-present threat of the Lannisters' manipulations. The Maester steps back from the map, his voice turning somber as he concludes. What followed was a world of subtlety and complexity, a world where Robb Stark's strength, though not broken, was severely tested. A world where House Stark had not been dealt its final blow, but where the game was far from over. The Maester slowly inhales and exhales, his voice growing more deliberate as he begins to unfold the tale. The flickering light of the hearth casts long shadows on the stone walls, setting the stage for the deepening intrigue of Westeros. Let us delve deeper into the unfolding of this new world, this realm without the Red Wedding. It is a world where the future of House Stark remains uncertain, but where Robb Stark's decisions have reshaped the course of the war, and indeed the very politics of Westeros. The Stark leadership tested. It is the late spring of 299 AC, and Robb Stark sits at the helm of an increasingly divided northern army. His forces, once united under the banner of revenge and justice, now find themselves caught between loyalty and pragmatism. His mother's warnings have proven prescient, but Robb's decision to refuse the Frey marriage has cost him dearly. Robb Stark's authority as king in the north, once unassailable, is now in jeopardy. With the cancellation of the wedding, many of his bannermen begin to question his judgment. His closest allies, House Tully and House Mormont, remain loyal, but whispers grow louder in the halls of Winterfell. Is Robb Stark a leader who can bring the North together, or is he a mere boy too impetuous for such weighty decisions? Catelyn Stark, a quiet but steady force behind her son's throne, pushes Robb to reconcile with the Tullys, who threaten to abandon the war effort. Yet, in her efforts to strengthen the North, Catelyn alienates her daughter, Sansa, whose hopes for a peaceful marriage to one of the Frey sons now lie shattered. Sansa's heart, like that of many in Winterfell, grows heavy with sorrow and resentment, torn between the safety of her family and the larger implications of the North's precarious situation. A North divided. As word spreads of Robb's decision, the North begins to show the first cracks in its unity. House Karstark, long resentful of Robb's leadership after the execution of their lord, defies his authority openly. The Karstarks, emboldened by the fracture in House Stark's ranks, demand greater power and control over the northern territories, threatening rebellion should Robb refuse their terms. Unable to ignore the threat, Robb summons the Karstarks to Winterfell. A tense parley takes place, one that would define the future of the North. The dialogue between the Karstarks and Stark forces grows heated, but ultimately, a fragile peace is struck. In exchange for greater autonomy, the Karstarks pledge their support to Robb's cause once again. But beneath the surface, animosities simmer, and the first seeds of civil strife in the North are sown. As if that were not enough, whispers reach Winterfell of new developments in the Riverlands. House Tully, whose forces had originally pledged to Robb, begins to flirt with other allegiances. Lord Hoster Tully, now in his declining years, grows more reluctant to risk the future of his house in an uncertain war. A secret meeting between the Tullys and the Lannisters is rumored to have taken place, an offer of peace and the promise of support in exchange for loyalty to the crown. Robb, ever the protector of the North, cannot allow such treachery. His decision to confront House Tully could either solidify his reign or further divide his forces. In an attempt to solidify his rule, Robb travels to Riverrun to face his bannermen with authority. The return of the Lannisters. Meanwhile, down south in King's Landing, the Lannisters wait for their moment to strike. Tywin Lannister, ever the strategist, watches Robb Stark's growing troubles with interest, knowing that a divided North is a victory for his family. Tywin, ever calculating, sends a covert emissary to Walder Frey, seeking to exploit the division between the Starks and Freys. The offer is clear. Frey's desire for revenge can be tempered with the promise of a greater future under Lannister rule. Tywin knows that in this game, blood is often not the most potent weapon. It is gold, land, and the subtle play of power that wins. And yet, Walder Frey, though seething with resentment, finds himself in a precarious position. He has no desire to bow to Tywin Lannister, whose presence in the realm he despises, but he also knows that the Lannisters control the gold and the armies of the South. In this world, it is a slow burn. Frey is still intent on vengeance against Robb Stark, but he is cautious, for the Lannister shadow looms large. The Southern Front, Tyrion, and the Game of Thrones. As Robb Stark faces mounting pressure in the North, the South swirls with intrigue. Tyrion Lannister, once cast aside in the game of politics by his father's increasing dominance, now finds himself maneuvering within the webs of power in King's Landing. He is not content to remain Tywin's puppet. Rather, he seeks to carve his own path in the political theater. Tyrion's sharp mind sees the cracks in his father's strategy. Tywin, ever rigid in his sense of duty, cannot understand the subtlety of Tyrion's machinations. While Tywin moves to exploit the growing strife in the North, Tyrion sets his eyes on a different target: the Iron Throne itself. He works behind the scenes to forge alliances with powerful houses, and even seeks out the remnants of Daenerys Targaryen's loyalists in Essos. But this path is fraught with danger. Tyrion's plans to usurp his father's influence require careful maneuvering, and one false move could bring the wrath of the Lannisters down upon him. The war in the north. A final push. Back in the north, Robb Stark's situation grows direr, as his allies in House Tully waver and the Karstarks push for more power. Robb is left with little choice but to make a final, decisive push against the Lannisters. He calls his banners to arms, marshalling his forces for what will be the most critical battle of his reign. Robb Stark's army marches south, determined to confront the Lannisters once and for all. The Battle of the Blackwater, so pivotal in the original timeline, is replaced by Robb's campaign, though the odds remain steep, with the Lannisters holding far more resources and reinforcements. Robb's path to victory, it seems, will depend not just on his military prowess, but on the political alliances he can forge in the final days before the battle. On the eve of battle, Robb receives a letter from his mother, Catelyn. It is a warning. She knows the Lannisters will never yield, and that they will fight to the death. But the letter also carries a message of hope. Catelyn, with all the experience of a mother, urges Robb to think beyond the bloodshed. Think of your people, think of your future. In the darkness before dawn, Robb contemplates her words. The final decision lies in his hands, to push forward into battle, or to forge one final peace with the Lannisters, seeking an alliance to preserve the North and the future of House Stark. But peace with the Lannisters may come at a price that could cost Robb his honor and his kingdom. The arrival of the Targaryens. As the battle lines are drawn and the fate of the North hangs in the balance, a distant storm brews. Far across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen, with her dragons and her army of freed slaves, prepares to make her move. With the fall of the Starks, or their uneasy alliance with the Lannisters, Daenerys sees an opportunity to reclaim her throne. Her vision for a new world is unyielding. Her conquest will not stop at Westeros' borders. New alliances and rising tensions. As Robb Stark prepares for the final push, and the Lannisters gather for their ultimate battle, alliances shift, enemies grow stronger, and old enemies return with new threats. Each house, whether Stark, Lannister, Tully, or Frey, must decide how far they are willing to go to secure their power. And through it all, Robb Stark's internal struggle remains. What kind of king will he become? The loyal son, the fierce warrior, or the calculating ruler who can navigate the web of deceit that defines the Game of Thrones? The Maester leans forward, his voice soft but full of weight. In this world, where the Red Wedding never happened, the game continues. The stakes are higher than ever, and none can say who will emerge victorious. It is a war of words, of battles, and of alliances. And as the season turns, the North finds itself on the edge of a precipice, where the fall could be as deadly as any sword thrust. The Maester's voice takes on a gravitas, as though he is nearing the edge of a precipice, his tale nearing its inevitable turning point. The fire crackles louder, and the room seems to tighten, as though the events unfolding in Westeros are closing in upon them, a clash of iron and blood. After months of political maneuvering, broken alliances, and fleeting hopes of peace, the moment of reckoning arrives. The banners of House Stark flutter in the wind, as Robb Stark prepares for the decisive confrontation with the Lannisters. The battle lines have been drawn, but the true test will not be fought on the fields of war alone. It will be decided in the hearts of men. The scene shifts to the battlefield near River Run, where the armies of House Stark, bolstered by the Karstarks, the Mormonts, and the remnants of House Tully's forces, face the full might of the Lannister army. The Lannisters, led by Tywin, have spent months strengthening their position. Reinforcements from the Reach and the Westerlands arrive in force, while Tywin himself stands at the head of the army, his mind ever calculating. a treacherous decision. In the quiet before the storm, Robb Stark stands before his generals. The weight of his father's absence is palpable, and his mother's counsel runs through his mind. Is this truly the path of the North's future, or merely the ambition of a boy who has yet to learn the price of power? Robb knows the stakes. If he loses this battle, it will mean the end of House Stark's hopes to reclaim the North. But if he wins, it will be a hollow victory without the necessary alliances to hold it. The Lannisters, though strong, have many enemies of their own: House Tyrell, House Martell, and the growing presence of Daenerys Targaryen across the narrow sea. Robb has one last chance to strike, but he must choose wisely, for every decision will weigh heavily on the future. His mother's letters, urging him to seek peace with Tywin Lannister, haunt him. Should he ignore her counsel? Or should he seek a way to avoid more bloodshed, knowing the price of this war may soon outweigh any potential gain? The betrayal. As the battle begins, the initial waves clash with thunderous fury, and the cries of war fill the air. But it is not the Lannister forces that deal the first blow. No, it is one of Robb's own men. Lord Karstark, whose family's pride was wounded by Robb's earlier decisions, sees an opportunity for his own advancement. In the chaos of battle, Karstark's forces break from the Stark ranks, charging towards Tywin's weaker flank. But they do not fight for Robb. They fight for their own glory and their own chance at power. This is no mere skirmish, it is a betrayal. The Karstarks, emboldened by their resentment towards Robb, cut through the lines, throwing the Starks' strategy into disarray. Robb's forces falter, unable to respond in kind to this unexpected treason. And as the dust of battle rises, Robb faces a harsh reality. His loyal bannermen, torn between personal grudges and the weight of war, are beginning to slip through his fingers. The death of a king. In the heat of battle, as his forces falter under the unexpected betrayal, Robb Stark charges forward, a lone wolf among lions, leading the charge with all the fury of the North. But in his haste, in his need to prove himself as the true king of the North, he overlooks his surroundings. His focus is too narrow, his anger too great. And in that moment of carelessness, Robb Stark falls, struck by the sword of a Lannister soldier who, ironically, is a distant cousin of the same man who betrayed him, Lord Karstark. With Robb's fall, the battlefield changes. The morale of the Stark forces collapses. The army, already shaken by internal division, now faces the crushing weight of their king's death. It is the beginning of the end. The Lannisters, sensing victory, push forward, their forces overwhelming the retreating Starks. The North, so long united under Robb's banner, begins to fracture, its people scattered in defeat. The Stark legacy broken. Robb Stark's death is the final blow to the North's hopes of standing against the Lannisters, and the ripple effects are felt far beyond the battlefield. Catelyn Stark, already heartbroken by the loss of her son and the brutal realities of war, now finds herself facing the unthinkable. Not only the death of her child, but the collapse of House Stark's position in the realm. She orders the retreat of the remaining Stark forces, but there is little left to hold on to. The once proud banners of the North now lay in tatters, and House Stark's claim to the throne lies in ruins. The remaining Starks, Sansa, Arya, and Bran, are left scattered, with no clear path forward. Winterfell is left vulnerable, and the North's fragile unity crumbles. Tywin's victory, Tyrion's dilemma. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister watches the outcome of the battle unfold from his chambers. The news arrives swiftly. Robb Stark is dead, and the North lies in disarray. Tywin stands at the window, watching the sun set over the capital, his mind already calculating the next step. His victory is all but assured. With Robb Stark's death, the Lannisters have regained control over the Seven Kingdoms, unopposed, save for the growing power of Daenerys Targaryen in Essos. Yet, even Tywin knows this victory is not final. The war for the throne has only just begun. Tyrion, who has remained quietly in the background, watches his father's cold satisfaction with a mixture of admiration and disdain. He knows that Tywin's victory comes at a cost, one that may be too high to bear. For despite the Lannister dominance, the world is changing. Daenerys Targaryen grows stronger each day, and the tide of battle may soon shift once again. The future of the North and Westeros. With Robb Stark's death and the fall of House Stark, the North's future is uncertain. The people, once proud and united under the banner of the Wolf, now face a harsh reality. Will they remain loyal to the Stark name, or will they turn their eyes towards a new leader, a leader who can reunite the North, but at what cost? As the Lannisters tighten their grip on power, the future of Westeros hangs in the balance. Robb's death, though a bitter defeat, may have ultimately saved the realm from further bloodshed. But in the ashes of that victory, the question remains: who will rise next? The Maester falls silent, the weight of the tale hanging in the air, the fire now flickering low. His eyes meet those of his audience, his voice a mere whisper, as he offers the final reflection of the chapter. In the end, the Game of Thrones is not won by those with the most soldiers, nor by those with the most honor, but by those who can see the game for what it truly is, a web of power, deceit, and sacrifice. And in that web, it is not always the strongest who emerge victorious, but the most ruthless, the most cunning. With that, the Maester closes the scroll and sets it aside, leaving the room to linger in the silence of the story's weight, the echoes of Robb Stark's legacy still resonating in the minds of all who hear it. The Maester leans back, the shadows of the room deepening as the fire dwindles to embers. The tale, so full of twists and turns, reaches its end, but the echoes of its questions linger like ghosts in the minds of those who hear it. A kingdom shattered. As the fires of war die down, the repercussions of Robb Stark's death are felt throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The North, though fractured, does not fade easily. In the months that follow, various houses scramble to fill the power vacuum left by House Stark's fall. The Boltons, having aligned themselves with the Lannisters for their own gain, now raise their banners in the name of the North. But the people of the North are no fools. They know that the Boltons, with their blood-stained history, can never truly represent them. The Ironborn, ever restless, see an opportunity in the chaos. Balon Greyjoy's sons, who once sought to claim the North through marriage and raiding, now turn their sights to the fractured kingdom. The Dorne, too, ever seeking revenge for past slights, begin to move their pieces into place. But the question lingers in the minds of all. Who will ultimately take control of the North? Can the North ever be united again? The Lannisters' hollow victory. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister stands victorious. But at what cost? The realm is still in turmoil, and though the Lannisters have regained the throne, their grip is tenuous at best. With the death of Robb Stark, the Lannisters have eliminated one rival, but the game is far from over. Tywin knows that Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, looms ever closer. Her conquest of Westeros seems inevitable, and with it, the promise of a new era, a new kind of power. Even Tywin, ever the strategist, cannot foresee the full reach of Daenerys' ambition. Tyrion, ever the observer, stands at his father's side, his thoughts deep and calculating. Tyrion knows that his father's victory is not complete. There are always more players in the game, and every victory Tywin has won comes at a price. The Lannisters' rule may seem unshakable, but the Iron Throne is not a seat that lasts forever. Tyrion, for all his cynicism, begins to see that the greatest threat may not come from outside, but from within, from the very dynasty that has claimed the throne for so long. The Stark children, exiles or return. Far to the north, the remaining Stark children, Sansa, Arya, and Bran, begin their own paths, each scarred by the death of their brother and the loss of their home. Sansa, once a naive girl with dreams of court life, has hardened. No longer the hopeful, idealistic young woman who once dreamed of marrying Joffrey Baratheon, she now harbors a quiet resolve. She knows that her future, if it is to be secured, will not come from a marriage of convenience. Instead, she must carve her own path, and perhaps one day return to claim Winterfell as her own. Arya, ever the wanderer, has begun her training with the Faceless Men. The road ahead is long, but her mind is sharper than ever. Her heart is colder, the fire of vengeance still burning within her. She knows that one day she will return to Westeros, perhaps not to reclaim her house, but to make the Lannisters pay for their part in her family's suffering. And Bran, the youngest Stark, continues his journey into the mystic realms of the Three-Eyed Raven. The visions he receives show him a future that is unclear, a web of possible outcomes, each more perilous than the last. Yet there is something in his visions, something that calls to him, urging him to discover the true nature of the Stark legacy and perhaps even change the course of history. Daenerys Targaryen, the Rising Storm. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen's conquest of Essos continues unabated. The fire of rebellion burns in her heart, and her dragons grow larger with each passing day. Her army is vast, and her claim to the throne of Westeros seems all but assured. But she is not without enemies. Her struggle against the old powers of Westeros will be fraught with challenges, and Daenerys, for all her strength, must contend with the ghosts of her family's past. Will she be the ruler the Seven Kingdoms need, or the tyrant they fear? Her heart is as open as it is ruthless, and her ability to balance power with compassion will be the deciding factor in her campaign for the throne. A final reflection. What comes next? The maester's voice softens, a final reflection hanging in the air as the flickering light of the fire casts long shadows on the stone walls. In the end, the death of Robb Stark, the fall of House Stark, and the rise of the Lannisters may have changed the course of Westeros forever. But nothing in this world, nothing in the Game of Thrones, is ever truly final. Power shifts, alliances are made and broken, and the true winners may yet be the ones who never hold the throne at all. House Stark may have lost its place at the head of the North, but it is not beyond redemption. The Stark name still holds power among the common folk, and there are always those who will fight to keep the flame of the North alive. But whether they will ever reclaim their homeland is another question, one that may be answered only by the children of Winterfell, or perhaps by those who dare to defy the throne altogether. And what of the Lannisters? Their triumph is not without its own weight, for the iron seat they hold is fragile. Their enemies multiply with each passing day, and the Targaryen threat looms ever closer. Tywin Lannister may hold the throne, but the blood of the dragon is never far behind. The maester falls silent, the flickering embers casting a glow upon his weathered face. He gazes into the flames, his voice barely a whisper. Perhaps it is not the victory of one house that matters, but the future of the realm itself. Will it fall into tyranny and bloodshed, or will a new power rise from the ashes of the old? The answer lies not in the thrones themselves, but in the hearts of those who dare to challenge the game. With that, the master closes the scroll, leaving the story unfinished, the future uncertain, and the fire slowly dying in the hearth. Reflective statement. As the night grows quiet and the last embers fade into the darkness, one must ask, What is the true cost of power? Is it the throne that matters, or is it the soul of the kingdom that must endure? What would have become of Westeros had Robb Stark lived? Would the North have remained strong, or would it too have fallen to the Game of Thrones? The Maester smiles softly, as though the answer is already known. But for now, he leaves it for the listener to decide. The Maester slowly rises from his chair, the fire now little more than a soft glow, the tale having come to its natural conclusion. His voice is steady, but filled with a quiet reverence for the world he has just recounted. The shifting tides of Westeros. Thus, the world of Westeros spins on, ever-changing, ever in flux. Had the Red Wedding never occurred, the ripple effects would have been felt across the Seven Kingdoms in ways both seen and unseen. House Stark, though wounded by the loss of Robb, might have found a new path, one leading not to vengeance, but to unity. The North, with its ancient traditions and fierce loyalty, could have become a bulwark against the chaos engulfing the realm, its heart still beating beneath the shadow of the Lannisters' rule. The Lannisters, for all their cunning and wealth, would have found the throne more precarious. With Robb Stark's life spared, the political landscape of Westeros would have shifted. Alliances realigned, and perhaps even Tywin Lannister's grip on the Iron Throne would have weakened. In this new timeline, the power of the Lannisters would no longer be as absolute, and their empire built on debt and fear might have begun to crumble from within. But beyond these families, what of the greater world? The rise of Daenerys Targaryen, the shifting loyalties of the Ironborn and Dorne, the machinations of Varys and Littlefinger, all these forces would have played out differently. The very future of Westeros, its fate, its survival, might have hinged on the decisions made by those who once seemed powerless. An open-ended question. The Maester pauses, his eyes gleaming with the weight of his words. And so, I leave you with this. In a world where the blood of the Starks still flows freely, and the Lannisters are not the undisputed rulers of the Seven Kingdoms, what kind of Westeros would emerge? Would peace finally be achieved, or would a new conflict arise to replace the old? And in the end, who would truly sit upon the Iron Throne, if not by force, then by the strength of the people's will? He smiles faintly, the flames flickering in his eyes, and walks slowly toward the door, leaving the question to echo in the minds of those who listen